My name is Clara. I'm 54 years old, and I thought I knew what love looked like. For 15 years, I've been caring for my mother-in-law, Margaret, like she was my own mother. Every morning at 5:30, I'd wake up to check on her before my 12-hour shift at the hospital. Every evening, I'd come home exhausted, only to cook her dinner and clean her house until it sparkled. But last week, as I drove home through the December darkness, after another long day of saving lives, I saw the lights blazing in Margaret's house at 11 p.m. Something felt wrong. My heart started racing, not from excitement about the Christmas I'd been planning for months, but from a deep, unsettling fear that everything I'd sacrificed was about to crumble. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button if you've ever felt unappreciated in your own family, and don't forget to subscribe, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about standing up for yourself. Let me paint you a picture of my life before everything fell apart. My husband David and I have been married for 25 beautiful years. He's 57, works in construction management, and travels Monday through Thursday, coming home only on weekends. Our daughter Emma is 22, a senior in college studying psychology, and the light of my life. She's smart, ambitious, and until recently I thought she truly understood the sacrifices I'd made for our family. Then there's Margaret, my 79-year-old mother-in-law. When David's father passed away 15 years ago, Margaret was devastated. She'd been married for 42 years and suddenly found herself completely alone. I still remember the day David and I sat in her living room surrounded by sympathy cards and wilted flowers, watching her cry into a cup of cold coffee. That's when I made the decision that would shape the next decade and a half of my life. I offered to help her through her grief. At first, our relationship was everything I dreamed of having with a mother figure. Margaret would call me every morning just to chat, sharing stories about David's childhood that made us both laugh until our sides hurt. She taught me her secret recipe for apple pie, the one David had been begging me to recreate for years. We'd go shopping together on Saturdays, and she'd insist on buying little gifts for Emma, always saying how lucky she was to have such a wonderful daughter-in-law. About 5 years ago, I started noticing small changes. Margaret would forget conversations we'd had the day before, asking the same questions repeatedly. She became more critical, pointing out dust on surfaces I'd just cleaned, or complaining that her food was too salty when I'd used the exact same amount of seasoning as always. I attributed it to normal aging and loneliness, thinking she just needed more attention and patience. My daily routine became a carefully choreographed dance. I'd wake at 5:30, shower quickly, and drive to Margaret's house to help her with breakfast and her morning medications. Then I'd rush to the hospital for my 12-hour shift as a registered nurse in the intensive care unit, spending my days caring for critically ill patients and their families. After work, I'd stop by the grocery store, pick up whatever Margaret needed, and spend my evenings cooking dinner, doing her laundry, and cleaning her house from top to bottom. David would call every evening from whatever city his job had taken him to, always asking about his mother first. "How's Mom doing today? Did she seem better? You're so good to her, Clara. I don't know what we'd do without you." His words used to fill me with warmth and purpose. I felt like I was doing something truly meaningful, caring for the woman who had raised the man I loved. Emma visited less frequently, as college consumed more of her time. When she did come home, she'd spend most of her time with friends, stopping by Margaret's house for quick hugs and small talk. Margaret would light up whenever Emma walked through the door temporarily, forgetting her complaints about everything else. "There's my beautiful granddaughter," she'd exclaim, and for those moments, I'd see glimpses of the woman who'd welcomed me into the family with such warmth. This past November, when Emma called to tell us she'd be bringing her boyfriend Marcus home for Christmas, I felt a surge of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. Finally, our family would be complete for the holidays. I immediately started planning the perfect Christmas celebration, envisioning Margaret's delight at having a full house again, and Emma's joy at sharing this special time with someone she cared about. The first crack in my holiday fantasy appeared during the second week of December. I was hanging Christmas lights around Margaret's living room windows, humming softly to myself, and imagining how magical everything would look when Emma and Marcus arrived. Margaret sat in her favorite armchair, watching my every move with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Those lights are crooked," she announced suddenly, her voice sharp and disapproving. I stepped back and examined my work. The lights looked perfectly straight to me, but I adjusted them anyway, wanting to keep the peace. "Better?" I asked with a smile. Margaret squinted at the windows, then shook her head. "Now they're too tight. You're going to burn the house down." This became the pattern for everything I did. No matter how carefully I decorated, how thoroughly I cleaned, or how perfectly I prepared her meals, Margaret found fault. When I vacuumed the living room carpet, she insisted I'd missed spots that I couldn't see. When I dusted her collection of porcelain figurines, she accused me of moving them to the wrong positions. When I made her favorite beef stew, she complained that the vegetables were cut too large. "The house has never looked clean enough for proper company," Margaret declared one evening as I was folding her freshly laundered towels. "When Emma brings that boy home, what will he think of us? He'll see dust everywhere and think we're dirty people." I looked around the immaculate living room, every surface gleaming under the warm lamplight, and felt a knot of confusion forming in my stomach. David's weekend phone calls became exercises in diplomacy. When I tried to explain Margaret's increasing demands, he'd sigh and say, "She's just excited about Emma coming home, honey. You know how much she loves having family around. She wants everything to be perfect." His words made sense, but they didn't ease the growing tension in my chest every time I walked through Margaret's front door. The breaking point came when Margaret handed me a handwritten list on lined paper. At the top, she'd written "daily cleaning schedule" in her careful cursive handwriting. The list included tasks like dust all surfaces twice daily, vacuum all rugs morning and evening, and wash and dry all dishes immediately after each use. At the bottom, she'd added, "House must be inspection ready at all times." "I want you to follow this every day until Christmas," Margaret announced, her tone leaving no room for discussion. "I won't have my granddaughter embarrassed by a dirty house." I stared at the list, calculating the hours it would require on top of my already exhausting schedule. When I gently suggested that maybe we could focus on the most important tasks, Margaret's eyes flashed with anger I'd never seen before. "Are you telling me my standards are too high?" she demanded. "I've lived in this house for 45 years, and it's always been spotless. I won't have some young woman come in and tell me how to maintain my home." The words stung like a physical slap. After 15 years of caring for her, I was still some young woman in her eyes. The third week of December brought a level of scrutiny that made me feel like a prisoner in Margaret's house. She began following me from room to room, pointing out imaginary flaws in my cleaning and demanding that I redo tasks I'd just completed. "There's still dust on that lampshade," she'd insist, even when I'd just wiped it clean. "The bathroom mirror has streaks. Do it again." My sleep suffered as I woke earlier each morning to accommodate Margaret's expanding list of demands. By 6 a.m., I was at her house scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing and polishing furniture that already gleamed. My colleagues at the hospital began commenting on my appearance. "Clara, you look exhausted," said Sarah, my closest friend in the ICU. "When's the last time you took a day off?" I couldn't remember. The most humiliating moment came when Margaret's neighbor Susan stopped by for coffee. Margaret had insisted I serve them in her best china, which I'd hand-washed and dried to perfection. As I set the delicate cups and saucers on the antique coffee table, Margaret examined each piece under Susan's watchful gaze. "I don't know why Clara can't get these cups properly clean," Margaret announced loudly, holding up a spotless teacup and pointing to a non-existent stain. "Look at this water spot. How am I supposed to serve my guests in dirty dishes?" Susan shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly embarrassed by the unnecessary drama. I felt my cheeks burn with shame as I took the cup back to the kitchen and re-washed it, knowing full well it had been perfectly clean. David's response when I called him that evening was more of the same. "Mom's just nervous about meeting Marcus," he explained patiently. "She wants to make a good impression on Emma's boyfriend. You know how important family appearances are to her generation." His words might have comforted me months earlier, but now they felt like dismissal of my growing exhaustion and frustration. Emma's phone calls from college became my only source of support, but even those conversations left me feeling isolated. "How's Grandma doing with the Christmas preparations?" she'd ask cheerfully. When I tried to explain Margaret's unrealistic expectations, Emma would laugh and say, "Oh, you know how she is about cleanliness. Just humor her, Mom. She's probably just excited to see me." The physical toll was becoming impossible to ignore. My back ached from constantly bending over to clean baseboards and corners that Margaret insisted harbored hidden dirt. My hands were raw and cracked from the excessive washing and chemical cleaning products. Most concerning, I'd started experiencing heart palpitations during particularly stressful moments with Margaret, my body's way of warning me that something had to change. But the emotional toll was even worse. I found myself dreading the walk up Margaret's front steps each morning, my stomach churning with anxiety about what new criticism awaited me. I'd started second-guessing every action, wondering if the way I arranged her medication bottles or folded her dishcloths would meet with her approval. The confident, competent woman who saved lives in the ICU was disappearing, replaced by someone who felt constantly inadequate and small. December 22nd arrived with the weight of months of mounting tension. Emma and Marcus were scheduled to arrive that afternoon, and I'd spent the morning completing Margaret's extensive pre-arrival checklist. Every surface in the house sparkled, every piece of furniture was positioned perfectly, and the refrigerator was stocked with enough food to feed a small army. I'd even arranged fresh flowers in the guest bedroom and hung new towels in the bathroom. Margaret conducted her inspection with the thoroughness of a military general, armed with her reading glasses and a critical eye that missed nothing. She ran her finger along windowsills I'd just dusted, checked behind furniture I'd just moved to clean, and examined every corner with suspicious intensity. For 30 minutes, she nitpicked details that were invisible to any reasonable person. "This will have to do," she finally announced, as if my hours of work had barely met minimum standards. "But we'll need to maintain this level throughout their visit. I won't have them thinking we live like slobs." The word "we" stuck in my throat. After months of criticism and impossible demands, I was still included in her standards only when it came to taking responsibility for potential failures. At 3 o'clock, Emma's car pulled into the driveway, and my heart lifted for the first time in weeks. My beautiful daughter stepped out, her dark hair shining in the winter sunlight, followed by Marcus, a tall young man with kind eyes and an easy smile. I hugged Emma tightly, breathing in her familiar scent, and feeling some of my stress melt away. This was what Christmas was supposed to be about: family love and togetherness. Margaret's transformation in front of our guests was remarkable. The critical, demanding woman who'd made my life miserable for weeks disappeared, replaced by the charming hostess I remembered from years past. She hugged Emma warmly, complimented Marcus on his appearance, and ushered them into the living room with genuine enthusiasm. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe the worst was behind us, but my hope was short-lived. As Margaret showed Emma and Marcus around the house, I noticed her pausing in doorways, her sharp eyes scanning for imperfections. When we gathered in the kitchen for afternoon tea, Margaret's smile became strained. "Clara," she called out sweetly, "could you come here for a moment?" I approached, assuming she needed help with something. Margaret pointed to the floor near the kitchen island, where a single strand of my brown hair had somehow fallen despite my careful cleaning. "Look at this," she said, her voice rising with each word. "How am I supposed to entertain guests when there's hair all over my clean floor?" Emma and Marcus exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden tension. "I'll clean it up right away," I offered quietly, reaching for the broom. But Margaret's anger was already building like a storm that had been held back too long. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she continued, her voice carrying to the living room where our guests waited. "I can't maintain standards when people don't care about cleanliness." The single hair became the catalyst for weeks of suppressed frustration. Margaret's voice grew louder and more accusatory with each sentence. "I've been trying to get this house ready for weeks, and every time I turn around there's more mess. How am I supposed to feel proud of my home when it looks like this?" I stood frozen, the broom in my hand, watching my family's Christmas celebration crumble around a piece of hair that was smaller than an eyelash. Then came the words that changed everything. Margaret turned to face me directly, her eyes blazing with an anger that seemed completely disproportionate to the situation. In front of my daughter, her boyfriend, and the Christmas celebration I'd worked so hard to create, she shouted, "If you want Christmas, come clean the house." The kitchen fell silent, except for the ticking of Margaret's antique clock on the wall. Emma's face went pale. Marcus looked at the floor in obvious discomfort, and I felt something inside me break completely. Not just crack or bend, but shatter into pieces that I knew could never be reassembled in the same way. The broom fell from my hands and clattered to the kitchen floor, the sound echoing in the shocked silence that followed Margaret's outburst. For 15 years, I'd absorbed her criticism, accommodated her demands, and sacrificed my own comfort to ensure her happiness. But standing there in front of my daughter and her boyfriend being publicly humiliated over a single strand of hair, I felt something shift deep within my chest. "I'm done," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my heart. The words surprised me as much as they surprised everyone else. I hadn't planned to say them, hadn't even realized I was thinking them, but once they were spoken, they felt like the truest words I'd ever uttered. Margaret's eyes widened in shock. "What did you say to me?" she demanded, her voice still raised and angry. But I was already walking past her, past Emma's confused face, and Marcus's obvious discomfort, heading toward the stairs that led to the guest room where my overnight bag waited. I could hear David's car pulling into the driveway, his weekend return perfectly timed for the family explosion. "Clara, wait!" Emma called after me, finally finding her voice. "What's happening? Where are you going?" I paused at the bottom of the stairs and turned to look at my daughter, this young woman I'd raised to be strong and independent, who was now witnessing her mother's moment of truth. "I'm going to pack my things and leave," I replied calmly. "I won't spend Christmas being treated like hired help in someone else's house." The words felt foreign in my mouth, as if someone else was speaking them. For so many years I'd swallowed my frustrations and convinced myself that keeping peace was more important than keeping dignity. David burst through the front door just as I reached the top of the stairs. "What's all the shouting about?" he called out cheerfully, clearly expecting to find a house full of Christmas joy rather than family drama. I could hear Margaret's voice rising again as she explained her version of events to her son, painting herself as the victim of my unreasonable behavior. In the guest room, I methodically packed the few items I'd brought for the weekend. My hands moved automatically while my mind raced through 15 years of memories, the countless dinners I'd cooked, the endless hours of cleaning the doctor's appointments I'd attended, the medications I'd organized, the sacrifices I'd made without question or complaint. Had any of it mattered? Had Margaret ever seen me as anything more than free labor? David's footsteps thundered up the stairs, and he appeared in the doorway looking confused and frustrated. "Clara, what's this about Mom says you're having some kind of breakdown over housework?" His words hit me like cold water. After 25 years of marriage, my husband's first instinct was to dismiss my feelings and take his mother's side. "Your mother just humiliated me in front of our daughter and her boyfriend because she found one hair on her kitchen floor," I explained, zipping up my small suitcase. After months of impossible demands and constant criticism, she shouted at me like I was a disobedient child. "I'm 54 years old, David. I deserve better than this." David ran his hands through his graying hair, a gesture I'd seen countless times during our marriage. "Look, I know Mom can be difficult, but she's 79 years old, and she's excited about having family here. Can't you just overlook this one incident for Emma's sake?" His words revealed everything wrong with our family dynamics. My feelings were always secondary to Margaret's comfort. My dignity was always sacrificial to keeping peace. "This isn't one incident," I said firmly, shouldering my purse and picking up my suitcase. "This has been building for months. Your mother has been treating me like unpaid domestic help, and instead of supporting your wife, you've been enabling her behavior." David's face flushed with defensive anger, but I wasn't finished. "I've given 15 years of my life to caring for your mother, and I won't give her one more day of tolerating disrespect." The drive to the Hampton Inn near the hospital felt like traveling through a different dimension. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel as I processed what I'd just done. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't rushing home to prepare dinner for Margaret or checking my phone for her requests. I was completely, utterly free, and the feeling was both exhilarating and terrifying. The hotel room was small but clean, with generic artwork and the kind of anonymity that felt like a blessing after months of being constantly observed and judged. I sat on the edge of the bed and turned off my phone, watching the screen go dark, with a sense of relief I hadn't expected. No more urgent calls about imaginary emergencies, no more detailed instructions about cleaning routines, no more apologizing for standards I could never meet. Sarah answered her phone on the second ring. "Clara, I thought you were spending Christmas with family." Her voice carried the warmth and genuine concern that I'd been missing in my own home. When I explained what had happened, she was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Oh, honey, I've been watching you disappear for months. I was wondering when you'd finally reach your breaking point." "Am I being unreasonable?" I asked, needing validation from someone whose judgment I trusted. "Should I have just ignored it and tried to make Christmas work?" Sarah's answer was immediate and firm. "Absolutely not. What you've described isn't love or family loyalty, Clara. It's emotional abuse. You deserve so much better than being someone's verbal punching bag." That first night alone was the quietest I'd experienced in years. No one called my name from the next room. No one demanded my attention or criticized my efforts. I ordered room service for the first time in my adult life, eating a simple pasta dish while watching a romantic comedy on television. The food tasted better than anything I'd eaten in months, probably because I wasn't anxious about whether someone would find fault with my cooking. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages when I finally turned it back on the next morning. David's messages ranged from angry to pleading, "This is ridiculous. Come home and we'll work it out." "Mom is upset and Emma is confused. You're ruining Christmas for everyone. I can't believe you're being this selfish over such a small thing." Emma's messages were more emotional. "Mom, please come back. I don't understand what happened. Marcus feels terrible about causing family drama. Grandma keeps asking where you are, and Dad won't explain anything properly." Reading my daughter's confusion made my chest ache, but I knew I couldn't sacrifice my own well-being just to avoid difficult conversations. The most revealing messages came from Margaret herself, delivered through David's phone. "Tell Clara she can come back when she's ready to apologize for her outburst. I don't understand why she's making such a big deal about keeping the house clean. Some people just don't appreciate what they have." Even in my absence, Margaret was making herself the victim of my unreasonable behavior. Sarah invited me to stay in her guest room until I figured out my next steps. Her house felt like a sanctuary filled with warm colors, comfortable furniture, and the kind of peaceful energy that comes from living without constant criticism. "You can stay as long as you need," she assured me as we shared coffee in her sunny kitchen. "It's time you remembered what it feels like to be appreciated." The first week of January brought unexpected clarity to my situation. Dr. Jennifer Rodriguez, the therapist Sarah had recommended, helped me understand that what I'd experienced with Margaret wasn't just difficult behavior from an aging woman, but a pattern of emotional manipulation and control that had escalated over time. Family caregiving shouldn't involve constant criticism and impossible demands, Dr. Rodriguez explained during our second session. When someone uses love and guilt to control your behavior, that's emotional abuse regardless of their age or medical condition. Her words gave me a framework for understanding feelings I'd struggled to articulate for months. Emma visited me at Sarah's house on a cold Thursday evening, her eyes red from crying and her usual confidence shaken. "Mom, I need to understand what happened," she said, as we sat in Sarah's living room with cups of hot tea warming our hands. "Dad says you overreacted to Grandma's perfectionism, but Marcus thinks there's more to the story." For the first time, I told my daughter the complete truth about my life with Margaret. I described the daily inspections, the impossible cleaning standards, the constant criticism, and the way her father had dismissed my concerns for months. Emma listened without interrupting her expression, shifting from confusion to understanding to outright anger. "I had no idea it was that bad," Emma said finally, tears streaming down her cheeks. "When I called you about bringing Marcus home, you sounded so excited about Christmas. Why didn't you tell me what you were going through?" The question hung between us, highlighting how well I'd hidden my growing desperation behind cheerful phone conversations and optimistic holiday plans. "I didn't want to burden you with family problems during your senior year," I admitted. "And honestly, I kept hoping things would get better on their own. I thought if I just tried harder, worked longer, cleaned more thoroughly, your grandmother would go back to being the woman who used to bake me apple pies and share stories about your father's childhood." Emma reached across the coffee table and took my hands in hers. "Mom, you've sacrificed so much for our family. When I was growing up, you were at every soccer game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference. Then when Grandma needed help, you stepped up without question. But that doesn't mean you should accept being treated badly." The conversation with Emma marked a turning point in my healing process. For the first time in months, I felt validated in my decision to leave rather than continuing to endure unacceptable treatment. My daughter's support gave me strength to continue building boundaries rather than rushing back to familiar dysfunction. David's attempts at reconciliation became more desperate as the days passed. He called Sarah's house repeatedly, sometimes angry about my abandonment of his mother, sometimes pleading for me to come home and work things out like adults. But his version of working things out always involved me returning to my previous role as Margaret's unpaid caregiver without addressing the underlying problems. "I had to take a week off work to stay with Mom," he complained during one particularly difficult phone conversation. "She keeps asking where you are, and I don't know what to tell her. This whole situation is getting out of hand." His focus remained on the inconvenience my absence caused him, rather than the conditions that had driven me away. The breakthrough came when Emma spent a weekend helping David care for Margaret. My daughter called me Sunday evening exhausted and frustrated. "Mom, I finally understand what you've been dealing with," she said, her voice heavy with newfound respect. "Grandma made me rewash the bathroom floor 3 times because she said it wasn't clean enough. Then she criticized the way I folded her towels and accused me of moving her furniture. How did you handle this for so long?" Spring arrived with unexpected opportunities for growth and healing. I'd moved into a small apartment near the hospital, a bright space with large windows and a balcony overlooking a community garden. For the first time in decades, I was living entirely according to my own preferences, eating meals I enjoyed, and maintaining my home according to reasonable standards. Dr. Rodriguez had helped me understand that Margaret's behavior likely stemmed from progressive cognitive decline rather than simple meanness. Dementia often manifests as increased rigidity about routines and standards, she explained. Your mother-in-law was probably experiencing anxiety about losing control, and cleaning became her way of maintaining order in a mind that was increasingly chaotic. This understanding didn't excuse Margaret's treatment of me, but it provided context that reduced my anger and resentment. I wasn't dealing with a deliberately cruel person, but with someone whose brain was betraying her in ways she couldn't control or communicate. The knowledge helped me approach potential reconciliation with compassion rather than bitterness. David's perspective began shifting after a conversation with Emma and Marcus, who had both witnessed Margaret's behavior firsthand. "Maybe Mom does need professional evaluation," he admitted during a rare, peaceful phone call. "I've been so focused on keeping her comfortable that I haven't paid attention to how her demands were affecting you." The family meeting at Dr. Rodriguez's office in April marked the beginning of real healing. David, Emma, and I sat together in comfortable chairs while Dr. Rodriguez facilitated a conversation about boundaries, expectations, and the difference between caregiving and codependency. For the first time in months, David truly listened as I described my experience without interrupting or defending his mother. "I never realized how isolated you'd become," David said, his voice heavy with regret. "I was so busy trying to be a good son that I forgot how to be a good husband. I'm sorry, Clara. I should have supported you instead of dismissing your concerns." His apology was the first genuine acknowledgement I'd received that my feelings mattered. Margaret's formal diagnosis of moderate Alzheimer's disease came in May, providing medical confirmation of what we'd all begun to suspect. The neurologist explained that her obsessive focus on cleanliness and her increased agitation were common symptoms of the disease's progression. "She needs structured care from professionals who understand dementia," he advised. "Family caregiving alone isn't sufficient anymore." The decision to move Margaret to Sunrise Manor, a specialized memory care facility, was difficult but necessary. The staff there were trained to handle the repetitive behaviors and unrealistic demands that had overwhelmed me for months. Margaret's room was decorated with familiar furniture and family photos, creating a sense of home within a therapeutic environment. My visits to Sunrise Manor twice a week allowed me to maintain connection with Margaret while preserving my own mental health. Sometimes she recognized me and asked when I was coming home to clean her house. Other times she seemed confused about who I was, but enjoyed my company anyway. The structure and professional care she received there reduced her anxiety and made our interactions more peaceful. David and I began couples counseling to rebuild trust and communication patterns that had been damaged during the crisis with Margaret. Learning to discuss problems directly rather than avoiding conflict became a cornerstone of our renewed relationship. "We lost sight of being partners," David acknowledged. "I treated you like an employee rather than my wife and equal." The transformation in my relationship with Emma was equally significant. She began calling me regularly, not to check on family drama, but to share her own experiences and ask for advice about post-graduation plans. "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, Mom," she told me. "It showed me that women don't have to accept poor treatment just to keep peace." This past December marked exactly 1 year since the Christmas crisis that changed my life completely. As I hung ornaments on the small tree in my apartment, I reflected on the journey from desperation to freedom that had defined my year. The woman who had trembled with anxiety every morning was gone, replaced by someone who knew her own worth and protected it fiercely. The healing process hadn't been linear or easy. Some days I missed the sense of purpose that came from caring for Margaret, even when that care was unappreciated. Other days, I struggled with guilt about not being available for every family crisis or holiday gathering. Dr. Rodriguez helped me understand that missing familiar routines didn't mean I'd made wrong decisions. Learning to love myself proved more challenging than I'd expected. Decades of putting everyone else's needs first had left me disconnected from my own preferences and desires. Simple questions like, "What do you want for dinner?" or "How do you want to spend Saturday?" required careful consideration because I'd forgotten how to prioritize my own happiness. The support group for family caregivers that Dr. Rodriguez recommended became a cornerstone of my continued growth. Listening to other people's stories helped me realize that caregiver burnout and family dysfunction around aging parents were more common than I'd realized. "Setting boundaries isn't abandonment" became our group's unofficial motto. My friendship with Linda, a 60-year-old woman who'd left a similar situation with her aging father, provided ongoing encouragement during difficult moments. "People will try to guilt you back into old patterns," she warned me. "But remember that protecting your mental health isn't selfish. You can't pour from an empty cup." The relationship with Richard, a kind cardiothoracic surgeon I'd met through hospital social events, developed slowly and carefully. After decades of having my emotional needs minimized, I was cautious about opening my heart to someone new. But Richard's patient understanding and genuine interest in my thoughts and feelings helped me remember what healthy partnership looked like. David and I reached a new equilibrium in our marriage built on mutual respect rather than traditional role expectations. He took full responsibility for managing Margaret's care and legal affairs, while I contributed emotional support and occasional visits without sacrificing my own well-being. "We're better partners now than we were before," he acknowledged honestly. Emma graduated summa cum laude and began working as a victim advocate, a career choice she credited partly to witnessing my journey toward self-advocacy. "Watching you stand up for yourself taught me that love doesn't mean accepting mistreatment," she explained. "I want to help other people find their voices too." Margaret's condition continued to decline, but the professional care at Sunrise Manor ensured her safety and comfort in ways I could never have provided alone. During my visits, I focused on sharing pleasant memories and gentle conversation rather than trying to meet impossible standards. Sometimes she seemed to remember our good times together, smiling when I mentioned Emma or David. The guilt about not being Margaret's primary caregiver lessened as I witnessed how much better suited the trained staff were for managing her complex needs. "You gave her 15 good years," Dr. Rodriguez reminded me. "That's more than many people give their own parents." The perspective helped me appreciate my contributions without feeling obligated to sacrifice my future. My work at the hospital took on new meaning as I applied lessons from my personal healing to my professional interactions. Colleagues noticed increased confidence in my patient advocacy and boundary setting with difficult family members. "You seem like yourself again," Sarah observed. "The real Clara, not the exhausted version we've been worried about." As I prepare for Christmas this year, I'm decorating my own tree with ornaments that reflect my personal taste rather than anyone else's expectations. The apartment smells like cinnamon candles and fresh pine scents I chose because they make me happy. Tonight, I'll wrap presents I selected thoughtfully for people I love without anxiety about whether my efforts will be criticized or appreciated. The bittersweet truth is that some relationships don't survive the establishment of healthy boundaries. Extended family members who expected me to continue accepting poor treatment have distanced themselves since I began prioritizing my own well-being. But the relationships that remained became stronger and more authentic through honest communication and mutual respect. I learned that walking away from dysfunction isn't abandonment, it's self-preservation. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to refuse to participate in harmful patterns, even when that refusal is misunderstood or criticized. Creating space for healing benefits everyone in the long run. The woman who was shouted at about cleaning houses and threatened with exclusion from Christmas would barely recognize the person I am today. I still care deeply about family and service to others, but those values are now balanced with respect for my own dignity and needs. Love without respect isn't really love at all. It's obligation, masquerading as affection. Tonight, as I look at my beautifully imperfect apartment with its lived-in comfort and genuine warmth, I feel grateful for the crisis that forced me to choose myself. The Christmas tree isn't perfectly straight, the ornaments don't match, and there might be dust on surfaces I haven't cleaned today. But this is my home filled with peace and joy that no amount of criticism can diminish. I've learned that true freedom isn't the absence of responsibility, but the presence of choice about which responsibilities you accept and why. Every morning I wake up in my apartment, make coffee in my own kitchen, and decide how to spend my day based on my own priorities rather than someone else's impossible standards. Some people might call my story one of family breakdown or selfish abandonment, but I call it a story of resurrection of a woman who was slowly dying under the weight of others' expectations and chose to live according to her own values instead. That choice saved not only my sanity, but ultimately my relationships with the people who truly matter. For anyone listening who feels trapped in patterns of giving without receiving, criticized without being appreciated or loved conditionally based on your service to others, I want you to know that you deserve better. You deserve relationships built on mutual respect, not one-sided obligation. You deserve to be valued for who you are, not just what you can do for others. Setting boundaries isn't mean or selfish. It's necessary for your mental health and for the health of your relationships. People who truly love you will respect your limits, even if they don't initially understand them. Those who don't respect your boundaries are showing you that they value your compliance more than your well-being. What boundaries have you needed to set in your own family relationships? Have you ever felt torn between keeping peace and protecting your own dignity? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about standing up for yourself in difficult family situations. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to let me know and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in life's most challenging moments. Share this with someone who might need to hear that their feelings matter and their boundaries are valid. Thank you for listening to my journey from doormat to dignity. May you find the courage to choose yourself when life demands you choose between your well-being and others' comfort. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in your own mistreatment. Here's to Christmas celebrations filled with genuine joy rather than anxious perfectionism, and to relationships based on love rather than impossible standards. You deserve nothing less.